Welcome back to the shop. I haven't done a whole lot on the Rabbler in the last week. Just been real busy with some other projects, work and home and all that good stuff. Shop's actually kind of a mess now from getting a few side things out of the way. I'll just walk you around for a minute. Decided to goof off with the grandkids' wagon for a little bit. Found some old go-kart wheels from a guy I knew, and so started playing with building them a little hot rod wagon. It's got a little ways to go. I'm going to build a front axle for it and put some tires on it to match and, you know, paint it up and things. But anyway, so there was one side distraction. Another one was I picked up a 3-in-1 machine from a buddy of mine. He wasn't using it, and I thought I could put it to use, so brought that home and built a stand for it. Got it all set up, as you can see. Made a few test bends and rolls, just kind of first getting things set up and adjusted. Needs a good cleaning and oiling, but other than that, I think it might help for making the wheel tubs and some other projects around here. If nothing else, who doesn't like more tools? So anyway, today's plan anyway is to work on getting the Dana 60 in place behind the Rabbler. I've actually got it set in under the car right now. As you can see, I don't know if there's enough light. It's a common complaint. This GoPro doesn't gather a whole lot of light, I don't think, so we'll light it up here in a few minutes when I raise the car up. But got it somewhat eyeballed into a rough location, but what I was finding is, you know, I need to set the height on it, and short of shims and trying to monkey around and get it up in place and lined up and everything, I had the idea of using some screw type jack stands. So what I did is I picked up some of these cheap trailer jack stands. They're 6,000 pound capacity, really inexpensive. I think I got all 4 of them and it averaged out to about $8 a piece. So this is what they look like. It's a screw type setup. I thought that would allow me to level it, you know, side to side, adjust the rear end where I needed to. I set one under the pinion, and I can set the angle on that as well. So what I'm going to do is actually put some angled steel on here, like a V-block, in order to hold the axle tubes, and then I'll make another one for the pinion that's just going to have a rectangle, and that will allow me to both set side to side, level it out, set the finish height, and roughly set the pinion angle. So I will show you that process now. Okay, here's what we got. These two should hold the axle tubes just fine. And then here's the one for setting the pinion angle. Put that right under the rear yoke. So let's get the car up in the air and start setting things up. Alright, got the axle set to height. It's at 14.5 to center the axle on both ends. Got the pinion angle set 3 degrees. Got the digital angle finder on it to show us where we need it. Plumb bobs, I had the car lower actually. I've got the axle forward to backward, or front to rear, within the 1/16 of an inch or so. That's going to change a little bit as I bring the car down and set it to ride height. So I'll have to adjust the axle just a little bit accordingly. But getting a lot closer at this point. Now it's time to start figuring out where we're going to mount the coilovers and set up the ladder bars into the brackets and start locating where the front cross member is going to be. Alright, I think I've got a plan for mounting the coilovers, but I need to do something I probably should have done before setting the axle in place. Where I'm going to mount them is actually where the old leaf spring sliders were. And as you can see, it was completely painted. So I started hitting it with the flap disc, and that just wasn't cutting it. So you can see the paint bubbling up. If you've ever used this or never used this, this is aircraft remover made by Rust-Oleum. This is probably the greatest thing I've ever used for removing paint. I've done it, used it for years. A lot of different things. I actually used it in the past, even take the carbon off the top of pistons when I was going to reuse them, and worked like a charm. But anyway, this is you can see how much that's bubbling up. It's been on there about 2 minutes now. So I'm going to strip that section so that when I mount the coilovers, here's the brackets. This bracket is going to be mounted right there, and that way I've got a semi-clean surface to weld to. I'll buff it up with the wire wheel and the flap disc again after the paint's off of it, but looks like we're going to be about 33 inches apart on the coilovers. I think that'll give me good stability. Put it inside the frame rail by about 2 inches on each side, and I've got enough room to get to all the bolts that I need to. All these are just mock-up hardware bolts, so don't comment on the video and give me hell for not using grade 8. That'll all be replaced. But for now, it'll get us in place. So anyway, waiting for the paint remover to work. Here's the other side where I didn't do any sanding yet. You can see it's all bubbled like crazy. So once this gets done, I'll clean it off, and we'll start looking at lining up where the brackets go. So I got the paint off where the coilover brackets are going to go. I just hit it with the wire brush after the paint stripper had a chance to do its thing, then hit it with the flap wheel. Seemed to work out well. I'll bring you in closer. went ahead and turned the differential nose down just to make sure I could get down on the bottom here good. As you can see, I cut off the old leaf spring sliders from when the previous owner had this. I think it was on a Mustang, he said. Anyway, I'm going to mount the coilovers pretty much centered where the old sliders were. Just right in the light here. See the paint marker there? That's dead center on it. What I did was set the differential at 3 degrees off level, which would simulate it being 3 degrees nose up once it's installed. And then I'm going to take the coilover bracket and set that level with my other angle finder here to the ground, level to 0 essentially. So the way that's going to work is when the differential is installed nose up 3 degrees, the coilover brackets will be straight up and down. That way I get, it's a vertical alignment and it should set us up right where I need to be. So I'm going to get to work on that. Alright, got the brackets on. Worked out just about like I hoped it would. Kept that pinion angle set at 3 degrees. And as you can see, shock brackets are tacked in place. Just tacked for now. Admittedly, I am new to this whole race car building chassis setup thing, so I'm not going to get crazy and weld it all up until I get a better idea that's actually going to work. So next up is to reset up the rear end back where I want it, lower the car down and bolt on the ladder bars and start looking at where we're going to need a cross member at. I went ahead and got the upper shock mounts just tacked in place. Not a whole lot to it other than just getting them up there about where I think they need to be. I used a piece of angle and ran a straight line all the way down the upper tube, and like I said, tacked the ears up there. Here you can take a look and see what we got going. It's just hanging for now. Not a whole lot of light, but let's see if I can bring it in a little closer for you and see what's going on. I think you can see it there, but there's 2 tabs mounted to the cross tube. The upper mount, you can see the line I drew all the way across with the angle iron, so I had them lined up, and they're just hanging for right now. In the meantime, after that, I went ahead and grabbed some bolts and set the ladder bars in place so that we can start figuring out where that front cross member goes. I'm going to go ahead and get the car lowered down and realign the rear end with the plumb bobs here, and then see where we're at for the front cross member. Alright, at this point I can't bring the car down any further yet. The front brackets are hitting the floor pan. I'm going to have to cut that out, but I expected that. So for right now at least, it'll give me a pretty good idea. I'm going to have to crawl under there or get the creeper out for the first time in many months. But it'll give me a good idea where to cut and where that cross member is going to fit. So I'm going to check that out now. I still need to double check now that I've reset the rear axle as far as location. I've got to double check that pinion angle again and keep kind of pushing forward toward where that front mount's going to be. So back at it. Alright, I marked where the bracket contacted the front of, oops, pay attention here, where the camera's pointing. Anyway, these brackets, I'll show you here in the light, I marked where that front tip on the top hits the frame of the floor pan. So you see that, that's that white line right there. Obviously the floor pan's got to be cut out, which is, you know, not a bad thing considering its condition anyway. But I've got to cut out a section, and looks like a cross member is going to end up right in front of that little angle change welded right to the subframe connector. Try to show you what I'm looking at here. The bracket, like I said, ended about right there. That was at that line. So if we put the tube in place, it's kind of tricky to do one-handed. What we end up with is roughly about like that. So like I said, just ahead of that angle change. So it gives me an idea where I've got to cut the floor. And I'll go ahead and get that done next, and we'll see about getting this tube up in place, and then we'll be real close to hanging this rear end. So we got big holes in the floor now. All kinds of room. Hopefully you can see that. There's some more light on this side, but should be plenty of room now to get this tube in here. So I'm going to get it cut to length. I'm going to lower the car back down, just verify location's going to be okay, and make some marks with that little short piece of tubing I've got. Probably it's going to be tomorrow at this point, because it's about almost 6 o'clock on Valentine's Day. So I think I'm going to have to go in and make dinner and hang out with my better half for the night. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Okay guys, new day in the shop, new projects, a little bit of changes. Did some research overnight and this morning, and decided I'm going to change the angles up just a little bit. I talked about putting the pinion on a 3-degree up angle. I think I'm going to bring that down just a little bit. The engine's probably going to be somewhere between 2 and 3 degrees down towards the rear, and I think I'm going to set the pinion at 1 degree. That gives it, with the ladder bar, it's not going to move much, but that gives it a little bit of room to move up without crossing over the drive shaft angle. So setting the pinion at 1 degree, I'm setting the ladder bars so the bottom bar is fairly level with the ground, and then putting that in the middle hole on the bracket. So I've got everything kind of set up and staged at this point. I'm going to be bringing the car down and see about getting that front cross member in. So I'll show you a little bit where we're at. Not much to see different than yesterday, but it is all set up in place. You can see where I marked the axle tubes for the plumb bob, so I'm set side to side and front to rear on both ends. Pretty much good to go. I know changing that angle changes the bracketry on my coilovers there. I'm undecided if I'm going to change that. With the pivot in the coilover, I think there's enough room for that little bit of misalignment, so I'm not too concerned there. We'll see how it goes though as I get closer to it, but hopefully I'll be hanging this rear end shortly. So I'm going to get to work putting the cross member in. Like I said, it's going to mount right to the subframe connectors and come across and see what happens. So let's get to it. Cross member is now in, cut to length and placed. I've just got a couple clamps up there now kind of balancing it so I can make sure that it was right where I wanted it. got it marked and ready to go. Kind of shiny right into the light, of course. So I'm going to get this welded in and then lower it back down, get the car leveled up, and tack the front brackets from the ladder bars to it. After that, we're just a few bolts away from the Rabbler finally having the capability of sitting on its own suspension. Okay, got that tacked in place. Next point is I've got the center marked here on the cross member, and what I need to do is lay out, you can see the white mark there, measure the distance equally each direction so that it matches the rear end, the width on the ladder bars. So if I remember right, they're a little over 25 inches. I'll double check that, and then I'll measure each direction half of that distance, and that'll give us the center point for the ladder bars. Then all I have to do is mark the width for the brackets on each side, and we should be able to get those tacked in place. Alright, the brackets are tacked in place, one side anyway. I want to show you what I've got going on. On the right side, you can see I've got just the one piece tacked in there, got it laid out where everything goes. This is how I'm going to go ahead and get everything lined up correctly. I cut off an old go-kart axle, made a couple of spacers. They're like 900 thou, just under an inch wide, which is the same spacing that the brackets on the rear end have. So I put one top and bottom, bolted them together tight, and that's going to allow me to maintain spacing when I'm welding on the cross member. As you can see back in there, that white line is actually the paint marker line based off the tape measure. Not 100% accurate, but that's why I'm using the spacers out here. I can be off a little bit on the inside, but as long as out here where the heim joints bolt up, they should fit in there just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and get these welded up. Alright, got those in, so I'm going to bring the car back down and double check, well, I don't know, this might be 10th check to make sure everything still lines up. If that's the case, I'm going to strengthen up the welds a little bit more. Right now most things are tacked, or at least in a point where I can grind them away if need to, but if I bring it back down, everything hasn't moved, everything's where it needs to be. I'm going to add a little more to it, and then it should be a matter of throwing in some bolts and have a rear end. Brackets are in, everything lined up nice. Who can tell me what I forgot when I lowered the car down the first time? The spacers I used on the brackets, forgot to take them back out, so lowered the car down, they kind of got in the way. But one thing I was real happy to see was as I lowered it down, the ladder bars slid right up into place. Didn't have to push them side to side, just right where they were supposed to be. So I'm going to show you inside the car. Hopefully you can see it's dark in there and the windows are dusted over from all the grinding, cutting, sanding, and everything else that goes on in here. But I've got a work light set up. I'll show you what the brackets look from the inside. You can see the bolts through there. Boy, that light is just exactly in the wrong place, but try, let's see, how about that? Anyway, you can see both brackets spaced there, the front of the ladder bar coming through, and bolt right through the center hole. So both sides, hopefully you can see that one over there. Now I'm going to do a little more welding, and I want to tighten up the braces that, or the tabs rather, that hold the rear shocks in place. Add a little more weld to those to solidify them. I'll bolt the shocks back up, and then hopefully be able to throw the bottom bolts in on the coilovers, and I think we're there, at least for tonight. At some point we're going to have to put the diagonal link in, but that'll probably be in the next video, so stay tuned. Alright, as you can see, it's in. Finally, milestone moment. Coilovers are in, brackets line up nicely. Of course, everything is just kind of hand tightened together or pinned in place right now, but it works. So, for the first time since, I don't know, October, we've got almost a complete rolling chassis. If you guys haven't yet, check out my other videos. You'll see one where it says Rabbler lets the smoke out. That was about the last time this thing moved under its own power or even sat on its own weight. So there's a couple of old videos before I decided to start filming the progress, but check them out if you get a chance. One thing I didn't mention, I picked up some junkyard wheels today. They are actually, I think the guy had them on a Ford Ranger, but he bought them just for the tires. The wheels are in fine shape actually, they're just cheap old steel wheels. They're Ford small pattern, but luckily I had the, well, when I got the axles they actually had Ford small pattern, but you know, my intention was to run GM, so I had them re-drilled and tapped. But finding those wheels with the right backspace and the right width for doing mock-up, unfortunately they are the other bolt pattern. So I've got to switch the studs back out. Shouldn't be a big deal. Just basically they unscrew out of the backside. Probably can't see that in the dark here, but they're, you know, typical racing wheel studs. So I'll have to unscrew them out of there, slide them back around to the 5-on-4.5, set them in place, and then we can start finish centering everything up, get the diagonal link on. Chances are I'll probably go get the tires mounted onto the wheels tomorrow, and we can see how this thing sits under its own weight. A lot of stuff to tie up still, but that'll be another day, another video. So until then, thanks for joining me at the Rabbler HQ, and we will see you next time.